Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast, where every other week we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Now, here are your hosts, Susanne McNinch and Chez Filippini.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. As you can see behind us, Chez and I are not in the studio today. We're actually on site at St. Peter Catholic Church over in Mary Esther, and we have the honor of having Tyler Acosta as our special guest today. But just as a reminder, if you haven't already, please check out our last episode with Bishop Walk, where he does part 2 of his Lenten series and really focuses this time on reconciliation. But Tyler, we're so grateful that you could join us today. Thank you for being on the podcast.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific.
We're so glad we're here. Thanks for hosting us. Thanks for finding a place for us. If you've seen the podcast before, we always start out with the first line from the document that we're named after, which goes, "The joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ." So Tyler, you're over here rocking it at Mary Esther, following Christ. What's going on in your life generally? Joys, hopes, griefs, anxieties.
You brought this up to me before we began. We were kind of talking about this a little bit. I think the joys and hopes and fears and anxieties for me are probably everybody struggles with this, but especially young adults and being in young adult ministry and especially being not on the other side of your vocation yet is like, what is the next thing? That might be a career thing. That might be a vocational thing. But you listen for the Lord's voice, you take action, you respond to that, and then you evaluate, okay, where are we now? Is this where I'm at? Is this where I'm meant to be still? And just trusting in him with that uncertainty, giving that over to him completely, but also looking to move and just not be complacent and stagnant. So that's kind of where I'm at. Focusing on being grateful for all the gifts he's given me right now, and keeping an open mind and open heart towards what he has in store for me in the future, and not like desperately clinging on to what I want to force,
Yeah, I love it.
This is the I think St. Teresa of Avila's famous line, "Let nothing disturb you, nada te turbe," or whatever it is. There's an underlying path of Christian discipleship which brings anxiety because we're not allowed to map out our life perfectly. And so we have to trust the Lord for the next thing. And that just naturally kind of brings this kind of anxiety. Even as a married person with 4 kids, I feel the same anxiety still, where am I going to be when I'm 40? Where am I going to be when I'm 50? What are my kids going to do in life? So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and thankfully we have a Savior too who's very clear, like, don't worry. It's a waste
Exactly.
of time. Why are you worrying? Your Father's too good.
That's right.
He'll take care of you.
Yeah, great.
Susanne, what's going on?
Well, I'm coming off a great weekend
Yeah.
in Gainesville where I spent with my daughter and all. It was just fantastic. So it's, as you and I have, talked about our kids and their, the evolution of learning as a parent and as they're growing up, it's just so neat to experience all the different cycles of life with them. And so I love this period that I'm in right now. And like Tyler, kind of thinking a little bit about, where I'm at, what the future holds. There's a lot of things on my plate right now, and I've got some decisions to make, but I think the Lord's going to guide me in the right direction. So I just have to have faith and confidence in all of that. So
we were sharing on the way over about your particular connoisseurship of donuts, and you had a particularly delightful breakfast down in Gainesville.
We did. It was a very healthy breakfast. And I think what I loved about being there too was just it motivated me to have a more active lifestyle, being around kind of a college town and the kids, and they're young and they're energetic, and sometimes, being a little more, mid-century, and you kind of get a little lazier and sort of set in your ways, and, I don't need to go out, I'll just go home. And no, I think it was a good motivation. So I'm happy for it. So, yeah. Not
a lot of moms can pull off a full weekend in Gainesville with college students, so kudos to you.
Thank you. What's going on with you, Chez?
It's once again coaching season, and I've been struggling with humility, and one of the biggest things, Lent always brings us up. Coaching brings this up for me. When you're kind of like the coach is this island, all parents' eyes are on. usually they're your friends or your peers or something like that. And because you've been in that position before, they have thoughts about how you're doing things. They have thoughts about how you're running the team. They have thoughts about how you're speaking to their child, which are all legitimate. But it's one of the reasons why I go back to coaching is it kind of like puts me in my place of, do I accept criticism? Do I have a generally kind of a receptive attitude towards other people? Am I as polite and kind and as organized as I think I am?
Right.
And it really reveals it. There was a moment, a good friend kind of offered some constructive criticism. And I recoiled. It was after practice one day and I was just like, don't you dare tell me how to coach this team. I watch so much soccer. I obsess over it all the time. And just walking away from it, I actually took to prayer afterwards. Like, come on, dude. Just like, if you're going to be a Christian, you got to be open and have a docile spirit and be accepting of those moments. Because it was done in charity. It was done in a spirit of friendship and brotherhood. Right. It wasn't done as like, you're terrible. So anyhow.
Yeah, that's the thing, is knowing which criticism to accept and which to say I don't care about.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I was revealed, it was like, I think I toss 99% of criticism that comes my way. And I should be a little more open to it. So anyhow. Other than that, things are crazy. Gabriel, we found licking the pew at Mass on Sunday, which was amazing. So just your normal run-of-the-mill insanity around here. But yeah, Lent is awesome.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, great. Well, we're here to learn a little bit more about Tyler and the young adult ministry that he overseas. But first, Tyler, let's get to know you a little bit better. So tell us about your upbringing. Where are you from? Your faith background? What's your story?
Oldest in a large Catholic homeschooling family in Missouri. So took a little doing to get me here. I started homeschooling definitely in 6th grade after middle school. I was in elementary school for a while, and my mom had been a teacher. When I was in 5th grade, we did this crazy, really interesting, the conservation department had sponsored the Wonders of the Ozarks Learning Facility, the WOLF program. And the gist is we're going to take kids who it was kind of a lottery of kids who had like perfect attendance. That was the biggest thing that they were looking for, and an interest in the outdoors. The entire classroom and all of the curriculum was themed around ecosystems and going out and doing things. Day 1, we're in the parking lot with oars, like learning how to row. Day 2, we're out on the water canoeing. It was like 2 field trips a week. It was amazing. And it really kind of opened me up towards trying new things and getting out of my comfort zone. So when that ended in 5th grade, we're looking back at jumping into real school, and it's like, why don't we try this homeschooling thing and give this a shot? And fortunately for me, it set me up really well for college, but also allowed me to jump into learning my faith in a new way. Our reading comprehension was just the stories of the saints. Wow. And so you're reading these as a kid, and it's like, oh my gosh, these people are incredible. That leads into learning more about theology and philosophy, even in high school. And I was sold. It was a good time. It propelled me into high school youth groups and things like that. Okay. So already starting a very formative time of my life. Coming up at the end of high school, I was in this spot of indecision. I was like, I don't know. I kind of want to go to college and have that experience. Seminary is also maybe a thing. And I was praying in adoration on a retreat once. And I think the Lord spoke to me. I was thinking about being on the grounds of Conception Seminary outside of Kansas, and just the peace that I felt while I had been visiting there. And this thought just came clear into my mind, like, you're never going to know for sure unless you go. And it just became pretty clear in my heart, like, after I'd finally given all of that over to the Lord, like, okay, I got to check this out. Kind of reminds me of that line in that famous Smash Mouth song, "You'll never know if you don't go." Yeah, the Lord spoke to me through Smash Mouth. Wonders never cease. After that, I talked to my vocations director and kind of articulated that I still wanted to check out college first. And he was like, well, if you know you want to do that, the Lord will get you to seminary in his time. You know, there's no rush, like go and give that a go first. So I studied computer science at Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. And after I got my degree, went off to Kenrick Glennon Seminary to discern the priesthood for a little bit. I was there for about 8 months. It was very formative. It was incredible. Getting a life of structured prayer, studying philosophy was incredible. Learning more about the liturgy and the importance of the various aspects of the liturgy. And also the fraternity I had with those guys. Friendships are different when you are focused solely on becoming better men in Christ and not afraid to like give each other feedback and criticism, you know, iron sharpens iron type of thing. So after 8 months, I left with great peace. Did another summer of Totus Tuus. I had done one during college. And actually like 3 days after I had gotten back to Springfield after leaving seminary, I get a call from the diocese and they're like, hey, we need a male missionary who's done it before to lead a team. Can you let us know by the end of this week? Thanks. And I was like, all right. I took it to prayer and it seemed like the thing to do. So had some more mission experience with that. And after that was in a very interesting place where there was no next step in my life. In college, seminary was the next step. Before college, college was the next step.
Right.
So having that freedom, I looked into a lot of options, applied for a lot of computer science jobs, music ministry jobs as well. I really was interested in seeing about how I could use my musical gifts to serve the church, but also the formation that I'd been given. Liturgical reform is something that's really, really important to me, that I think we've made a lot of strides here. Less about the traditional hymns versus the contemporary hymns and more about what does the church actually say about how liturgy is supposed to be done? What are the actual documents? Pope Benedict has this great book, The Spirit of the Liturgy, that I've been working through, and talks about how it's not as much of a thing for us to kind of get in and put on a show. It's God has told us how he wants us to be worshiped, and that's been passed on through the church too, and there are good reasons for all of that. So I went on CatholicJobs.com. I sent out a dozen applications all over the country and was doing some interviews. And when I was interviewing with the people here, it felt like home. It felt like Missouri for me. Just this crazy sense of hospitality just from that initial call.
Okay.
And in the interview process too, which was really just hanging out with our parish administrator and Father Paul Wade over lunch and chatting. And then I got to come down and while I was flown down here for my interview, I was able to come down and do music for one of the masses. And coincidentally, it was also the parish picnic. So I got to meet a bunch of people in the community. And in kind of praying about that, thinking about it, discerning it afterwards, it seemed like this was the door that was opening. So
wow.
I followed it down, got started in August of 2021. And as I was settling into my job as a music director, having been given all of that formation at the seminary and also through all my different mission experiences, I really wanted to see about kind of revitalizing young adult ministry in this area. And so a lot of things to get me started with that.
Yeah. Wow.
Very cool.
I know.
First of all, for everyone listening, that book, Spirit of the Liturgy, if you're just I've never really read anything about Mass in a really kind of a detailed, this book changes people's lives. I've met many priests and seminarians and just anybody. If you want to kind of look at the depths of the riches of liturgy, great book, Joseph Ratzinger, Spirit of the Liturgy. But to all that, just the fruit of kind of all this experience building into now service for the church in the liturgical world. But we're here to talk about young adult ministry.
Absolutely.
So we'll get another episode. We'll do a follow-up episode on just the liturgical side of things. But on the podcast, we've done a lot of school stuff, right? So met with principals and stuff like that. We talked about Mother Clelly. We had Peter Rogers on, talked about St. Mary's Fort Walton Beach, talked about high school youth ministry, done Totus Tuus, actually, which you were in the background for, training our missionaries in our diocese a couple of years ago. But then there is this kind of amorphous group known as young adults, and the age, wherever you check, sometimes it's this age, this age, this age, or this state of life. Just give us the overview. What is young adult ministry? What are the contours of it? What's the fun of it? What's the challenges of it? Just go for it.
So as I understand it, the bishops consider it to be 18 to 35, single, married with kids.
Okay.
That is a huge demographic.
That's right.
It is so hard to just have any one event that reaches out to all of those different people. You have college students included in that.
That's
you have
right.
college graduates. You have people you have families as well. I remember my first memory is going into a table right over there for coffee and donuts after Mass. And it was the young adults table. There was a little sign and everything. And I got to meet some of the young adults in the community, make some connections, and realize everybody is hungry for community. I mentioned this before. We used to be in a position where communities would build churches. Yeah. There would be a city and they would build the church in the center and everybody would congregate there. And it was the center of society, really. Now the script is flipped. Churches have to build communities, especially in this area where we have so many military people. We have snowbirds, people are coming in and out. And especially for some of those military people or even civilian contractors, people who move to the area for short periods of time, it's this combination of having a fear of going out and investing in relationships because you have to leave them so soon. I'm sure anybody who's been involved in military, Navy, et cetera, has been experiencing that. But at the same time, there's a hunger there. There's a hunger for real, authentic relationships, which is something that we as a parish have been trying to move towards, and then me specifically in this ministry. So the question for me was, okay, how do we do that? Like, do you just put on some events? Do you just do youth group for young adults? There's no life team for young adults. And I do what I always do and just went on the internet and seeing what works for other people. I learned about the young adult ministry death cycle.
Oh, wow.
Which is something that this community, this particular at St. Peter has happened, where what happens is you have one person who's kind of like got the fire, got the spirit ready to go. They start up stuff. They're going crazy, like planning events and ministries and whatnot. And it's all kind of on them. And then what will happen is that leader will go off and get married or start a family or have a job opportunity and move. Something positive, something very good for them. They leave, everything collapses, right? There is nothing. Somebody else comes, does the same thing. They leave, everything collapses. This keeps happening over and over. And now you have a community that's afraid of good things happening to its leaders. So you have to start somewhere, but something you have to keep in mind along the way, and this is really plays into discipleship and everything, is you're empowering other people to go from simply just like being served and whatnot, which is good. You have to start there. You have to start somewhere, right? To recognizing you have gifts as well. And like, we're all called to take this message. We all have our own little personal circle of influence where we're supposed to go out and spread the gospel, not just out in our jobs, which is definitely important, but also even within the church, we all have a role to play. So empowering other people to do that. So what that looked like for me was a Bible study. I mean, that's where you always start, right? All the resources nowadays really point to Bible studies. We started with a Lenten one, which was good because that gave like a specific timetable. And I quickly found that you can advertise in a bulletin, you can make announcements at Mass, you'll get some people there. Personal invitation. That's like step one for anybody getting involved in young adult ministry or small group formation. Like, personal invitations matter. Even if you have a bunch of young people in your pews who are hearing your announcements, they still might not feel that connection. You know, if you can go and catch somebody after Mass and introduce yourself, say, hey, we have this group going on, like, that's the end. We started with our Bible study. That came and went pretty well. We did a couple other things, but I noticed that people in our group had varying interests. Some wanted to look more into apologetics. Some wanted more like social type things. So my response to that was like, oh, well, let's just fill up the calendar with a ton of different events to cater to all of these different things. We went from like one thing a week to there was something going on every single night for a while there.
Wow.
And that was good. That brought in some new people kind of in generally. Like 6 people will show up to anything from a pool of anywhere from like 12 to 24. But what I ended up finding was I still was not yet at the point of passing that off to anybody else. I was kind of stuck running the show. And then people are clamoring like, hey, the men's group actually that we have now is a very, very good example of this. People were saying like, giving me a lot of feedback, like, hey, we want a men's group. And I was like, guys, do you see the list of things we have going on? I cannot take on anything else. So I took the step of saying, well, if you want something, like, let's have one of you guys step up and do this. The problem was I took somebody who was not really formed for that role, even though they were available for it. And it kind of blew up in everybody's faces. And I was also trying to impose a real structure on it. Like, you know, we can't just sit out here and just talk. We have to like be pointed towards some goal. I was really closed-minded about the different kinds of groups. There are different groups that serve different purposes. One that kind of paradigm that has proven very helpful is win, build, and send. A win group is that's the launching point. If there's somebody that you meet on the street and say, hey, come to this small group, like that is where they can come, experience a community, connect with other people. They're not going to feel like a complete outsider. Build is after you've done that, hey, let's look a little deeper into these things. You know, let's have a Bible study. Let's look deeper into our faith or things like that. And then send is more of an outreach thing. We had some win groups, and I realized that this men's group needed to be a win group. I wasn't going to go in there and make it into this Bible study. And in letting that go, it's been super successful. Very strong core of guys who are like dedicated. They're like, this is one of the most important parts of my week. They're bringing in people from work who are just kind of on the fringes or maybe lost their faith a little while back and having these amazing discussions. And it's very simple and low maintenance, actually. So, you know, there's a place for all of those kinds of groups. And one of my friends has stepped up to take on that role. Nice. So if I'm able to, you know, back off a little bit, I have some trust. Like, okay, you know, we're gonna work this through together versus just stuck on any one person.
Wow. So understanding the evolution of, of starting something and then all the different phases it goes through. So where are you at right now with the young adult ministry here at St. Peter?
So we are mostly focused on a core of like consistent recurring events. Okay. It's really important to start with that, I think. Mm-hmm. You can add in some social things here and there, like do some stuff at a frequency that makes sense and doesn't burn anybody out. But it's good to have a solid core. So for us, and the parish has actually helped with a lot of this as well. We have a Monday night group that I lead called Scripture and Tradition. I have found my favorite small group format, and I encourage anybody and everybody to rip me off if you like this. We're Catholic. We have both Scripture and tradition. And so the way I like to do this is we start off, everybody shows up, we're just kind of talking, catching up on life for a few minutes. And then we start with Lectio Divina. We meet in the parish library so we can use the books that are already available. I have personally turned away from series where it's like, hey, let's work through an actual book thing. Those work for some people. That's great. Nobody does the reading, including me, in my experience, which is why it was really helpful to like, well, if we have a Bible here and we're just going over the next Sunday's readings, like there's nothing to do in advance, especially for young adults who have very busy lives and whatnot. Right. And like it's all they could do to get out to some of these events sometimes. So we meet and then we start with Lectio Divina. There are times and places for like actual Bible studies where you're going in, looking at the translations and everything. But this is an interesting way to have, like, for those not familiar, it's basically a format of praying with Scripture. Instead of reading it in the like strict sense of trying to make connections and stuff, you're kind of meditating on it, seeing how it applies to your own life and turning it into a prayer experience. So we do that for the first half. And then for the second half, we do a catechism study. So we just pick up the catechism, pick up wherever we left off the previous week. If you're a newcomer, you just kind of jump in wherever it's at. It's really not that hard to jump in. We just take turns reading paragraphs and having a discussion as we go around. Wow. And then we end with, prayer together. We usually share prayer intentions and close it off with that. So we do that on Monday nights. That's open to anybody. We all use GroupMe as kind of a communication. A lot of the young adult groups here do that. There are Facebook groups and things like that, but GroupMe seems to be where all the kids are at nowadays. And even some of the adults, actually. More on that later. In addition to that, we have our Tuesday night men's group, and there's also a Thursday night women's group. Okay. So that core of having like a co-ed thing, a men's group, and a women's group has been very helpful for us. And also the big thing, remembering that this demographic covers like anywhere from singles to families, was kind of in response to seeing some of the efforts I was pushing through. There was somebody here in our parish, fits that young adult mold with a big family of his own, who said, we're going to start a family life ministry. And I think this is like for any parish or diocese or whatever looking to make young adult ministry happen. I think this is what really needs to happen is you need to have like young adults for sure for like singles or like newlyweds or anything like that as its own thing, and family life ministry as its own thing as well. Okay. Just because the needs are different. Childcare is obviously a big need for family life ministry. It's really a different stage of life. There are some commonalities between the two. There are times where we all get together for things and there can be some overlap between the two, but I think it's a very wise thing to do to target those specific groups just because of their specific needs. That's been very fruitful here.
That's bad. As you're talking, Tyler, and I was thinking about these other groups you talked about. If I go to a first communion class at any parish and I ask a third grader or a second grader, like, why are you here? It's like, well, my mom and dad brought me here, and I'm preparing for a sacrament. If I go to maybe even some high school youth groups, like, why are you here? Sometimes it's my mom and dad brought me here. Sometimes it's I'm preparing for confirmation. And then you start maybe those first seeds where you start to meet somebody who's participating voluntarily. Like I want friends, or I like the experience of youth groups. Usually not very kind of detailed, but this group is like, there's no sacraments anybody's preparing for. It's a time where people kind of are like, all right, if you're still going to mass, you kind of take it for granted. Like, I guess they're here. And maybe that's why a lot of young adult ministry doesn't exist. Kind of take it for granted. Well, like, they're going to mass, so they'll kind of self-generate their ministry. But if I ask people in your group, like, why are you here? And we already talked about community. Is it a bunch of varied answers? Is it a number of answers, or just kind of like, I don't know. What is it?
Across the board, over a variety of different people, it is that hunger for community.
Okay.
Which says a lot about us as people, right? Yes. We are not meant to do this alone.
Right.
Our society tells us, like, be independent and strong and all these different things. And it's good to work towards that. You should be independent, but you should also not be your own island.
Yeah.
And especially in the spiritual life, we need each other. We need people who have experience to share it with those who don't have it. And likewise, we learn from each other, you know? So yeah, universally, it is a hunger for that community.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that myself. When I first joined the military, the big thing was to go to the club after work, especially on like a Friday night or whatever. But as time has evolved, less and less people are doing that sort of thing. Clubs are closing down because participants just aren't there, and everybody, leaves work, scatters, goes to their home, and they're on a device of some sort, and that's kind of their life. So you lose that sense of community, and that's really what draws a lot of people to organizations. So I think this is really incredible that that's what this group is doing for your community here. And it's really nice to see. Now, there are, coming from doing Totus Tuus, in that age group that you worked with to this age group now, I've got to imagine that there are different challenges that young adults face as compared to teenagers, and coming in out of high school and things like that. So what are the biggest things that our young adults are facing these days that you feel like becoming part of a young adult ministry would help them with?
If you are a young Catholic who is trying to live your faith in America, you are living in a culture that is the opposite of what you're trying to stand for.
Okay.
So you need other people to help strengthen you in your own beliefs. I hear from so many of our military people, like I'm like the only Catholic person in my squadron, and people have questions. People on the outside have questions. They see that you have something, or that you stand for something that is good and true, and they have questions. They may be asking to undermine you. They may be asking to understand, which is usually a good into having a real conversation and starting a real connection. And so, yeah, for those who are less formed and want to be not just like constantly having to think on their feet, having a community that's trying to move together in becoming disciples of Christ in every way, in spiritually, fraternally, and even like in terms of intellectual formation, like that is such a great benefit, and to be able to do that as a community. And then for people who are, we have some people in our community who are like, they're already like, they've read the Bible and the Catechism and the saints and stuff like that and the fathers, and they're coming out and swinging, having all these debates. And to be able to bring their perspective to the group, but also like get some validation that like they're not alone in that struggle,
Definitely.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
And surprisingly too, actually, a transferable skill from Totus Tuus to young adult ministry. Well, there are some events, pub theology or discipleship on draft things. There's one in Pensacola. There's one around here that St. Mary's has been putting on that are great kind of win groups to bring people into those smaller groups. That's kind of, because that's where it really happens. That's where you're really walking with other people on a regular basis, sharing life together and growing together. Small group facilitation is something that you learn from high schoolers that is equally applicable to all stages of life, young adults, older adults, everybody. Learning to facilitate a small group is its own set of skills, that will serve any demographic.
As marriage and family life director, I'll ask maybe the slightly, I don't know, biased question or something like that. I think a lot of times people look at young adult groups in the Catholic sphere as like, well, it's kind of like, a singles dating pool or something like that. And that's a caricature, right? And you kind of already mentioned just the aspect of when a young adult ministry is really thriving, it's a combination of families and single folks. But does vocational discernment feature as kind of like, is it intentional or just kind of like we're just providing a space where it kind of naturally happens because we have people who are active in their faith, so they're clearly kind of seeking to learn from the church and from one another, and then it just kind of naturally unfolds? Or, speaking to the vocational discernment aspect of young adult ministry.
Yeah, I'd say it's providing a space for that. I mean, you would hopefully want to find a spouse who's also like cares about their faith, loves Jesus more than anybody else, and is like seeking to, expand that. So creating a space for that is a very good thing. But beyond that, it's just supporting people and being there for people. Because vocational anxiety is very, very real for everybody, no matter what vocation you're discerning. And to have a space to talk about, you can't talk to anybody in the secular world about that. Who
right. would? You're thinking about celibacy? Wow.
It's like incomprehensible to anybody. Yeah. So again, to have a space to like just talk about like what you're going through, where you're at, and get the perspectives and wisdom of other people who have walked those paths. And if you have that wisdom, to be able to share it. And it strengthens you to hear about where other people are at, makes you remember where you were at. And supporting people in whatever their vocation, and helping them to realize like, yeah, I'm not trying to put you in a box here, force you into anything. I just want I want what's best for you. I want you to follow the Lord wherever he's calling you, and I support you in that. That's so important.
Yeah, good.
It's so exciting to see marriages and religious vocations actually come out of people in our immediate young adult group.
Beautiful. Well, I've got to think that you have personally grown, spiritually and, professionally and personally throughout this whole process and becoming a leader like this. So what are some of those things that you have discovered about yourself, or how have you grown in this particular role?
It has been personally challenging because I have a tendency to avoid conflict a little bit, be a little bit more agreeable and please people, go crazy putting on a bunch of events for everybody and whatnot. And I've realized that for my own sake and for the sake of success in the ministry, like it's much more important as a leader to be able to delegate well, and to be able to assess when things are and aren't working well and make difficult decisions sometimes. I see that in young adult ministry. I've seen that in my own music ministry as well. We're currently trying to have a little bit more structure with our rehearsals and whatnot in hopes of fleshing out our skills and being able to do a little bit better. I'm seeing a lot of fruit with that. Relying on other people.
Okay.
You have to put in some of your own. If nothing is happening, someone's got to take it up and start. And if you're doing that, there's a point at which you have to rely on other people. It's temptation to pride, actually, to just want to do it all yourself.
Sure.
And trust that other people will be there for you when you need them as well.
Okay.
We have a strong kind of a deanery by deanery presence. If you kind of look across the diocese, Pensacola's got young adults. We've got Fort Walton Beach, Mary Esther. We've got Panama City. We've got Tallahassee. But I mean, I think it goes without saying a lot of communities, both in our diocese, outside of our diocese, don't intentionally invest in young adult ministry. So if you're a pastor or a priest or a church worker or just an interested person, you're like, maybe my community should have this. Kind of what are the upfront you already kind of mentioned the genesis of this group and the event building and stuff, but do you start with a big event? Do you start with a budget? Do you start with like a staff member? Do you tap on Father's shoulder and say, you got to appoint somebody to do this or something like that? Do you kind of let it grassroots come up? I don't know. Thoughts on how to get from zero to somewhere?
I think you have to start with people.
Okay.
I think you have to look at who is really invested here, not just in their faith, but beyond that in the community, in the parish, because there are people, I think, in every parish who are like on fire and ready. And if you invest in those people, that's how you see growth. That's how you see success. I think it takes some open-minded pastors. I think that was actually the first thing here was when I got here, I went to, I think it was the first pub theology event that they put on here, and Father Doug Martin was the speaker there, and it was put on by St. Mary's Parish. Okay. As a thing for young adults to kind of get some people in the area. So if you truly have like nobody in your parish who you can recognize that would be like a good fit for a leader, you may have to start with just more of a general thing. And again, people are hungry for community. So if you do a good job of publicizing that, making direct invitations where you can, hopefully you'll get a bit of a turnout. You can't start out being focused on numbers. Yep. You can't start out on being focused. We're successful because we had 100 people at this event. You're successful if you're able to find people and put them into an area where they're able to grow together. From that, the growth will happen naturally. So yeah, that's one thing, is that you can't be too focused on numbers at the outset. And like you mentioned, there are like specific pockets here that all have their own. I think it's really important for the group to form like its own identity. The Pensacola young adults in particular do a really great job with that. They have a group meet. I believe they have a Facebook page. They're very consistent with the way they promote their events. I think they have like a team over there. And for any newcomers, it's like, oh, this is an actual thing. This is not just like something that some guy is trying to cobble together, which it may have to start there. But if you keep that in mind from the outset, as far as, working with the diocese to promote the things that you have going on, forming a strong group identity. And then also looking to link things between those two groups as well. I hear right now that they're working on trying to get like a young adult diocesan retreat going, to get people from all of these different cells together so that we can all see that we're not alone, and that we can, form things together and work together. I think that's important as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just an endless list of theology on taps, just like your first job is just find a brewery and get some people there or something like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to be flexible and adaptable.
Yeah.
Okay.
You start somewhere and you are constantly evaluating, like, is this working?
Mm-hmm.
What are the needs of the community right now? And that involves evaluating the people who are attending,
Yeah, for sure.
That is kind of one of the complications of not having, like, it's like, we could do anything. Like, we don't have to cover the curriculum of, the catechism on confirmation. We don't have to follow the USCCB's kind of 4-point plan for this. Kind of like, well, we're just kind of doing stuff, see what works. And
and talk to everybody and see what are people interested in,
Yeah.
Consecrations are great. Like the St. Joseph or Marian consecrations are really great, like built-in, easy reading, and small groups over like a common spiritual practice. Like you said, Bible studies. We had a rosary group for a while. We may pick that back up again. You can use the availability of sacraments in your area to advantage. I know in Niceville, they have like a young adult. They have an evening mass, and the young adult community pushes everyone, hey, let's go do that, and then go get Chick-fil-A or something afterwards.
Nice.
Good.
So yeah, with you're saying, that flexibility and creativity and just like open so many possibilities can be like paralyzing, but it can also be like liberating, because if you're trying to be flexible, you have a lot of freedom to respond to the needs of the people in your community.
Nice. Yeah. Good deal. So you started out with a personal invitation, and that's kind of how a lot of this got started for you. So I'm going to let you sort of end this podcast a little bit by giving a personal invitation maybe to those who haven't joined yet. So can you tell our audience, if somebody is interested, how do they start participating in a program like this?
Yeah. So if you're living in the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee, we have a website. And there is a young adult page on that website that is current. They have that updated with events from all of the different areas, so you can figure out what's going on near you, one-off events, recurring events. The Diocesan News Notes newsletter is fantastic. They also publish things and try to keep that as current as possible with the events going on. Ask around at your parish, talk to your pastor, see if there's anything going on that way. There are a couple different Facebook groups as well. I know there's one for Pensacola for sure, and there should be like an Emerald Coast Young Adults one. Check the different parish bulletins. You may have to check adjacent parishes in addition to your own. That was something that was really helpful for me when I was first starting out, is like, what are other parishes doing? Who can I talk to? Where can I get plugged in? And if there truly is like nothing going on near you, maybe consider if this is something that the Lord is calling you towards. You have to be bold. You have to be not afraid to take some of those first steps, and especially maybe get outside of your comfort zone. But I mean, one thing that was helpful for me was just making a list of some people I had met here in the parish, and like, who is somebody I could just go to directly invite and say, hey, I'm doing this. I had this idea for this group. Can you come, once a week? And then I went out and talked to all of those people directly, and you might get some no's. You'll almost definitely get like, no, I'm so busy. Or at least at this stage in my life. But you'll get some yeses, and start with that. Start small. Don't be afraid to start small, and don't get discouraged if you have just a few people coming consistently. That's a really good sign, and there will be growth if you stick with it.
Terrific. Well, Tyler, gosh, I can't tell you what a privilege it was to have you on the podcast with us today. I mean, I know your parents and your siblings are probably sitting back up in Missouri, super proud of you and all that you've done. And thank you for making our community strong, and for making this area strong, and for dedicating your life to serving and answering the call. And we really appreciate you and everything that you do. Thank you. Please continue to pray for success of the ministries here at St. Peter, and for young adult ministry across the diocese as well. And in all dioceses. Yep. Yeah. Indeed. Well, guys, it is time to wrap up our episode. Two things. First and foremost, just want to plug it again. The Eucharistic Congress. Don't have the flyer with me, but again, tell your friends about it. This event, July 17th through 21st up in Indianapolis, with Bishop Walk and a whole bunch of other people, 50 to 80,000 other people. You can go to ptdiocese.org/revival for more information there. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, back in the studio. Bishop, I think it'll be Holy Thursday that the episode comes out. Bishop is going to just talk us through step by step the Triduum. So Holy Thursday through Easter Sunday, his perspective as a priest, as a bishop, the theology of it, the fact that this is one single glorious liturgy that goes on for
2.5, 3 days. Tyler could probably correct me as a director of music liturgy.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right. Just an awesome episode awaits for us as we wrap up Lent and head into the beautiful Easter season. So we'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit our website, gaudiumετspes.net, or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.